So, for those of you who are here, welcome. And you are more than welcome and encouraged to go ahead and get a plate of food and start eating, and the program will start at about 12:20. I think
of my favorite books as a kid. I'm going to talk about it.
I don't know. You know, my dad was a professor, and I grew up in a boys' prep school, and he should have liked me as a child.
Yeah, but he didn't. Yeah.
And I grew up not wanting to read, so the fact that I would
Look at you, and you went to a PhD.
I always did good, I did well in academics.
Yeah.
I just thought I was supposed to.
Yeah. But no
I
kids'
never
books
loved,
reading.
my brother would on summers would read inside, and I'd be out running around outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually, we had a good crowd. But
This is very good. This is not great.
Actually be good.
For a lunch hour, I'm very impressed. Yeah. You guys have this whole block, right? That was so much space.
And we're doing this big future block thing right now, and then a capital campaign.
I'm sure that's a multi-year, difficult, complicated thing.
Apparently, I have to move out of my office in sometime in the next 2 years.
Okay. But you know now that you have to.
Yeah. So, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, so good to see you all again, and such a great crowd. I see a lot of folks who were able to come to Monday and or Tuesday, and some new faces as well, so glad you all are here. As many of you know, we have been talking about the Passion narrative in Mark's Gospel, and we're continuing that today. We're so glad to have Dr. Jen Quigley here with us. She is Associate Professor of New Testament at Candler School of Theology. As many of you know, this whole series is sponsored by the Candler Foundry at Candler School of Theology. Dr. Quigley has degrees from Harvard and Boston University. She joined the Candler faculty in 2024 after teaching at Vanderbilt University Divinity School. Her research focuses on economics and archaeology in early Christianity, and she leads travel seminars to Greece that trace Paul's missionary journeys. And she's also an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. We had the opportunity I think it was just the fall, October, to have her come and teach one session in a class on faith and money. And she's such a great teacher, so engaging. And so we're just so honored to have her here with us today. So please help me welcome Dr. Quigley.
Thanks, everyone. It's really great to be with you, and I'm just so grateful for the invitation to come back to All Saints. I had a lot of fun with you all in the fall, and I'm so impressed you all during Holy Week are able to be together and to be studying together. And quick plug for the Candler Foundry. If you've enjoyed this series, there are a number of upcoming online courses that you can sign up for that anyone can take. They're meant for the community. So today I'm going to talk about discipleship and doubt, this kind of series we've been having. And I'm going to focus on the ending of the Gospel of Mark and the multiple endings of the Gospel of Mark. And this might feel like I'm skipping ahead a bit of Holy Week because you're like, oh, we're going straight to the Easter story. But actually, we're going to look at the ending of Mark and see how it kind of completes some of the Passion narrative story. And actually, maybe the earliest version of Mark kind of belongs more in that larger Passion narrative. So the long and the short of it is that Mark 16, the ending of the Gospel of Mark, is a messy text. It just is a messy text. And this is one of the things, if you open up your Bibles, especially if one of those nice NRSV or NRSV updated editions, they're actually going to tell you it's a messy text when you open up Mark 16. Bible scholars and translators and editors, we like to smooth over any complications in the text and just present to you something nice and pretty and in good English. But this is a place where it's so messy, we kind of have to disclose to you that it's a bit of a mess. And the problem is, we don't know where the Gospel of Mark should end. So we have three options here. So we have what's called the short, middle, and long ending of the Gospel of Mark. So the short ending is Mark 16, 1 through 8. So a lot of Bibles will have a quick little note or something right after that that says, many places end the gospel here, or something like that. If you go onto like Bible Gateway and look up something like the NRSV or something, you'll see a note there. Then we have a middle ending, Mark 16:8b. Some Bibles don't even put this verse in, by the way. And then some other places put it as Mark 16:21. So it's like a floating verse. See, this is really messy, right? And then our third option, we have the long ending of Mark 16:9-20. And it's okay, I'm not going to do sword drills. We'll go through the actual text in a second. But that's the text you're going to be more familiar with, the kind of post-resurrection appearance that we see in the other gospel accounts. All right, so Mark 16, very messy. And we have a short, a middle, and a long. Okay. So what's in those endings? So let's pretend that the ending of Mark is the short ending. Here is how the Gospel of Mark would end if that's the case. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Boom, the end. Seems like it like cuts off in the middle there, right? So that, though, is the short ending. Let's look at the middle ending. So if we're ending with the trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And then some places just insert here. And all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterwards, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. Amen. It's like a little prayer. And they did tell Peter, I promise. Like, that's the little insertion there. So that's the middle ending. Okay. And now let's go look at, this is where we'll get a little more familiar. So here's what we might be more used to, continuing in 9. Now, after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who'd been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country, and they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were sitting at the table, and he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation. The one who believes and is baptized will be saved, but the one who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. By using my name, they will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes. And if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick and they will recover." So then the Lord Jesus, after he had spoken to them, was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and proclaimed the good news everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the message by the signs that accompanied it. So I hope you see some of these patterns as we get the longer and longer endings. The short ending is they ran away afraid and they told nobody. And then some folks were like, wait, no. And then they told Peter. And here in the longest version, some people try to tell people and then they're not believed, and then Jesus has to show up directly. So those are our kind of 3 options of endings for this messy Mark text. So what the heck is going on with all of this, by the way? So let me get very nerdy for a second. I'm a total Bible nerd, so I'll nerd out with you for a second. Why are scholars so confused about this, what we should do, it's because our different early manuscripts are also messy about what these texts should read. So some early New Testament manuscripts, those are some examples, Codex Vaticanus, because it's like in the Vatican, etc., only have that short ending. Some other ones have that middle ending. And lo and behold, some other ones also have this long ending. But a lot of other manuscripts and early church writers add notes to the long ending that says, this is a later edition. So they note, like very early on, hey, this extra stuff might not be the earliest. So most scholars will think that the earliest version of Mark is this very short one that ends with an empty tomb, a message about why the tomb is empty, that Jesus is risen, a command to go tell people, and then they don't do it. They run away afraid. And so then we're kind of left with, what do we make of this short ending? What do we think about this? And how are you supposed to find any meaning in a text that ends with no resurrection appearance and an empty tomb and fear? So some biblical scholars have tried to solve this by thinking it's a kind of technical problem. So there's a guy named Matthew Larson, and he wrote a whole book that he's thinking kind of Mark as our earliest gospel, perhaps, might have kind of ended as a series of unfinished notes. So like we end Mark 6, 1-8, because like the guy was copying different sources, remembering oral materials, and he's just getting it all together. And like I have a lot of these. I bet some of you have these at home, like these incomplete notebooks at home. And then, well, there's an incomplete notebook. These are unfinished notes for how to finish Mark. And that might explain things. So that would be a pretty kind of technical, weedsy reason that doesn't have to do with anything theologically. So you could go with that. That's kind of received mixed reception. It's really hard to prove that someone's like, it's their unfinished notebook because we don't have the notebook, right? Other folks have noted that it really changes the whole kind of mood of the Gospel of Mark, and especially the Passion narrative, if you keep this short ending. So there's a scholar named Tom de Bruyn who said that when you read Mark with this short ending, Mark kind of reads like a Gothic novel. It's got aspects of the Gothic to it. And if that's a little like, whoa to you, let me give a kind of definition of Gothic that he's got. Gothic tales usually take place in an antiquated or seemingly antiquated space. And within this space, or a combination of spaces, are hidden some secrets from the past that haunt the characters, psychologically, physically, or otherwise, to manifest unresolved crimes or conflicts that can no longer be successfully buried from view. What are some of the big things we see in Mark? A, Jesus is always telling them to keep things secret until the right time. And then at the end, he's commanding them to, the disciples are being commanded to share it. But also, it's kind of spooky to end with an empty tomb and no answers and a kind of open-ended question. And the other thing is, there's a huge theme in the Gospel of Mark of fear. Everyone is always afraid in the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus is always telling folks not to be afraid. And guess what? Then they're afraid, right? So we'll get back to that in a minute. But so some scholars have read kind of that kind of mode. And actually, Peter McClellan has actually talked about the Gospel of Mark as a haunted space. Just thinking of the kind of, and I think reading the kind of sparse passion narrative of Mark really gives that kind of hauntingness to it. It's so evocative, but it's so brief in its content. So those are some scholars who've kind of thought about it, but I want to help us also kind of think about it, maybe what the gospel has going on, both rhetorically and theologically. So if we end Mark 16 with this super short ending, as I talked about, the last two words of the gospel, this is Codex Vaticanus here, a little picture of how it looks, and like those little dots, and then at the bottom it says kata Markon, according to Mark. But the last two words of the entire Gospel of Mark, of the story of the life, death, passion, etc. of Jesus Christ, is ephubunto gar, for they were afraid. The last thing that's said is, for they were afraid. So what I would say is the middle and longer endings try to fix Mark. They try to fix the fear that's the end of this gospel by adding on assurances or messages to Peter, or about Jesus working through the disciples, or by adding that Mary Magdalene does share the good news but isn't believed, and along with an appearance by Jesus who upbraids them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, right? So I think these middle and long endings are trying to fix something that is there. And what are they trying to fix? Ending this gospel in fear. All right. So what are we supposed to do with a gospel that ends in fear? Has anyone ever read this book? I brought a copy with me. Anyone ever heard of this? The monster at the end of this book? I got some nods at least. I'm going to pass around my copy. This was one of my favorite books when I was a little kid. It's called The Monster at the End of This Book, starring, of course, lovable, furry old Grover. And it's a Sesame Street book. And the conception of this book is that Grover sees the title of this book, that there is a monster at the end of this book, and he gets really scared. And he wants you to stop turning pages because there's a monster at the end of this book, and he's scared of monsters, and he doesn't want to get to the end of this book. So the pages as you go, he lays a brick wall to stop you from doing a page. He ties ropes. He keeps getting more and more upset at you as you turn pages to get to the end of the book, right? And so he's getting more and more scared. And of course, the conceit of this book, sorry, spoilers, everyone, it ends, you get to the last page of the book, and it's just Grover there. He says, I am the lovable furry old monster at the end of this book. Oh, you all were so afraid. I'm so embarrassed, right? So this book, like, this really works on little kids. It works on me a lot. And I read this book a lot to my niece and nephew. They love this book. But it really builds up your emotions, right? And I have to say, the very first time I read this book to my niece and nephew, when they were very small, and I was doing like the voice and everything, like the Grover voice, and they looked at me like, what are you doing? They looked at me. They were getting a little scared because I told them there's a monster at the end of this book. Because they're like, why are you turning the pages, Auntie Jen? Like, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. And then once they knew the ending for the first time, everything changed. And now when you read the book to them, they're like grabbing at the pages to turn them for you because you already know the ending. Right? You know not to be afraid because you know Grover's the monster at the end, and now you're in on it. You're in on the secret, you're in on the joke, etc. But I have to remember the first time I read this to them, because I'd forgotten as a kid, this is actually a scary book. The first time you read this book, it's a little like, oh my gosh, we're putting monsters in books for children. So there's a kind of a conceit of fear, and then the fear not being there once you know what's going on. I actually think this book is a really helpful way for us to think about the ending of the Gospel of Mark and how we can kind of frame what it means to think about a gospel, a ending in "for they were afraid." So I wanted to help us make some sense of fear and endings in Mark. So in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is constantly telling people not to be afraid. And also people are constantly terrified of him. I have just a couple examples here. This is not all of them. In Mark 4, when Jesus calms the storm, disciples are terrified. Not just of the storm, but of Jesus. In Mark 5, when Jesus raises the synagogue leader's daughter, people are afraid. In Mark 6, when Jesus is walking on water, many, many, many others. Jesus' presence, signs, and actions, and his teachings make people afraid in the Gospel of Mark. And at the same time, he's constantly telling them, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And then usually they're afraid anyway. So in Mark, then, the opposite of faith in Christ is not doubt. There's not really any doubt in the Gospel of Mark. The opposite of faith is fear. So it's not, oh, I believe in Jesus or I don't believe in Jesus. It's I believe in Jesus or I'm afraid. And actually, fear isn't even necessarily a bad thing. This, I think, is so powerful because Jesus is always telling the disciples not to be afraid. But the only time he's really the disciples really get critiqued is when they're afraid and then they don't do anything. Or when they're afraid and they don't say anything. And so actually there's a really good example in the story of the woman with a flow of blood in Mark 5. You can read the other accounts in the other Gospels. Mark emphasizes that she goes looking for healing and is terrified. But she's actually still healed anyway. So it's not like fear doesn't let you not encounter Jesus. It's actually that when she goes and he says, your faith has made you well, the problem isn't fear. The problem is when you let fear stop you from coming to Jesus, or when you let fear silence you into not saying anything or to not sharing the gospel. And that's what I think is really kind of profound about this ending of the Gospel of Mark, is that it's actually continuing the theme that we've seen for the whole of the gospel. We have faith, and the opposite of that is fear. And we're constantly being told not to be afraid, but also there's an acknowledgement that sometimes we're afraid. But even when we're afraid, if we kind of come to Jesus anyway, that is what is kind of praised in the Gospel of Mark. Okay, I think I'm perfect on time. Yes, okay, great. So anyone have any questions about this? Want to talk about fear, faith, the Gospel of Mark, the monster at the end of this book? Yes.
How about substituting for fear?
Yeah.
Amazement.
Amazement, yeah. We do also have amazement in there too. But Jesus isn't telling people not to be amazed. We have which they are too, absolutely, yeah. And this is, I think, what those scholars who are trying to talk about the like hauntingness of Mark or the gothicness of Mark makes you feel stuff. Right? If you read along the Passion narrative, I think you'll find as you go through Holy Week a kind of a arc to the emotions of the week, right? And it's really hard when you've done it for 5 years, 50 years, etc., to get the feelings again for the first time. But I think actually Mark is setting you up to have those feelings and then to get to participate in the drama of it as well. It's trying to get you to feel stuff. And so especially for this Holy Week, I'd encourage you to kind of lean into the emotional swings of this whole narrative. And that doing that actually lets you kind of let go of fear and lean into something like amazement, which I think is a really helpful framing for the week. And also to kind of, I hope, find again, and to remember for others who might be, maybe you have some folks here who are newer to the faith or have been away from the church for a very long time. They might need some coaching in the big swings of this week, the big emotional swings of this week, because think of them like my niece and nephew hearing the monster at the end of this book for the first time. The really cool thing about the ending of Mark, when it ends in, for they were afraid, and they told no one, how do we know the story? They had to have told somebody, right? We can't actually end with no one telling anyone anything, because then we don't have a faith. Then we don't have a Gospel of Mark. And so actually ending in the for they were afraid and they didn't tell anybody, it asks us to start telling people. We know the ending because someone went and told someone. And so we should go tell others, right? So if we're reading someone the ending of the Gospel of Mark or the monster at the end of this book, it might be a big scary thing for them at the beginning, but actually the life of faith is forming people to be able to then share it themselves at the end. Great. Other questions? Yeah.
So, different scholars.
Yeah.
3 different versions.
Yeah.
Always struggle with this.
Yeah.
I mean, which one?
Yeah. So I will tell you my personal opinion. I'm not going to tell everyone what to do for all time with the biblical text. I think the short ending is the earliest one. I think and most scholars do as well. And so if you're gonna I'm not gonna read it if it's a later edition, you stop right there at 8. And then what you're left with is how we make theological sense of a gospel like that. And one of the reasons I think it's so clear that these others are later, it's partially that other manuscripts, especially with the long ending, are like, this is a later edition. But it's also, the other reason is, We have this thing in biblical studies called lectio difficilior, very nerdy. It just means the more difficult reading. And so if something's the more difficult reading, it's probably the earlier one, because people want to correct the awkward stuff. And it's sure awkward to end with no one told anyone anything. They were very afraid and ran away, right? So it's much more likely that folks are coming in and fixing what they see as a problem by adding these additional endings to Mark. So for me, the shorter ending is the earliest one. Yeah. 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 Well, yes, a lot of Western kind of Christians who use the King James Version in English are, yeah, absolutely. I will say a lot of these church fathers and stuff, like the Orthodox tradition, like folks have known about this. It's just not something most lay people have seen in their Bibles until we start getting translations of the Bibles by biblical scholars. Yeah. Yeah, so this isn't like a new discovery. It's not like someone found a new manuscript and now it's all destabilized. It's that kind of different ways of translating and stuff, including stuff like the King James over time, went with that long version, went with that smoother version. Other questions? Yeah, yeah. I always recommend to students, they always ask me like, oh, what Bible translations or commentaries and stuff do you like? I think it's always good to get a Bible that you're like not used to, or that has some kind of notes from people you're not used to. So one of the ones I really recommend to students a lot is called the Jewish Annotated New Testament. And it's by Jewish scholars who are biblical scholars who are kind of help you understand some of the kind of law stuff when Jesus is having run-ins with the Pharisees, and just ways that I find most lay people, it's just totally new to them. And they'll be like, oh, there's actually a text in the Mishnah that says something about that. And then they'll explain it to you in an accessible way. So that's one I always recommend. Yes?
So, in Mark's gospel, what do you think the disciples are most afraid of? And then just thinking theologically and pastorally, this can be, we can all try to answer this question. What do you think that we are often most afraid of?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. Well, the question is, what are the disciples most afraid of in Mark? And then also, what are we all afraid of today? In some respects, they're afraid of Jesus, actually. But it's like Jesus' power, who he is, his ability to actually like transform everything. And so usually it's when Jesus is doing something that reveals who Jesus is as the Son of God. When he's walking on water, when he's healing someone, when he's doing something kind of extra human. It's that combo of awe and absolute fear of like, oh, I'm encountering something greater than myself right now. And I totally get that. That's like a very normal human response. And then Jesus's response is always like to take the fear out of it. He's not saying like, don't have awe, but he's like, take the fear out of it. I'm still kind of here with you. And then again, he's not critiquing if you are afraid. He's just critiquing if you just like freeze. It's the freeze response, the silence that he's critiquing. And yeah, I think that's a good question for all of us today. It's like when you think about, I find it both very comforting to think about the opposite of faith not being doubt, like that, like it's okay to doubt. It's okay to have questions, to like use my best brain power, to ask really hard stuff, to read something I'm slightly uncomfortable with or might disagree with. I find that very comforting to do that. But it's a little actually terrifying to think about the opposite of faith being fear. Because I think there's a lot of places in our lives we freeze a bit in our faith because of fear. And it might be because we don't want to change, or because we don't know what it would look like if we actually did this new thing, or actually maybe it is a little awe-inspiring and terrifying to follow a God who is both so great and also so intimately present with us and the person of Jesus. And that maybe following Jesus does require some things about our lives to change. Like, I think both on the personal, the communal, and the social level, like there are some things to be like, whoa, about. And to think about that, a faith response as being able to move forward toward Jesus in spite of that fear. not to immediately get rid of it. There's no magical formula to be like, aha, now I'm not afraid. But to know the ending of the story and to feel like we do need to participate in sharing the news. Otherwise, we end up with, for they were afraid, no one told anyone anything. It kind of puts it on us. We have to tell the story for this generation, or otherwise, no one tells anyone anything. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think of our days now.
Yeah.
There being a place where fear is put over here.
Yeah.
In ways I don't know.
Yeah. Can you say more?
It's unfaithful to be afraid.
Yeah.
So you want all that over here.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like this.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say there's a lot of stuff in society that tells us to be afraid, or that we should be afraid of certain things or certain people or certain places, or tells us we should never be afraid of anything. We're the most amazing, strongest, bestest, awesomest ever, and we've never done anything wrong ever, right? And I actually think the kind of juxtaposition in Mark between faith and fear is actually rejecting both of those simple things. It's both saying to us, don't be afraid of anything the world tells you to be afraid of, right? It's Jesus. The disciples aren't afraid when, like, I don't know, the Roman soldiers show up. They're afraid, like, because they've had this encounter with someone greater than that, right? But at the same time, Jesus isn't telling them, don't be afraid, and then being like, anytime they feel fear, he's like, you're the worst disciples ever. And I really think this example, I really encourage you all to go read the story of Mark healing the woman with the flow of blood. Is really a powerful example of this, that it's not about being like suddenly super macho and having no feelings ever. It's actually moving towards Jesus in spite of that, right? So if you just box off your fear and pretend it doesn't exist, you don't actually get rid of it ever, right? I don't like heights very much. So like when I tried to ride a roller coaster the first time, it was like, I'm not afraid of heights. That didn't go. Of course I was still afraid of heights, right? But when I kind of acknowledged the fear and was able to work towards it and through it, I was able to ride a roller coaster the first time, right? I think that's Mark is actually offering us a really nice and complex theology about that. Yeah.
How is Mark, he doesn't really solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, how do you live with or move through or
Yeah.
thrive in the face of?
Yeah. I actually think I find it really powerful to just end with this short ending, because it makes you like, for those of us who've ever had to preach a sermon, which I suspect you have, you want folks to kind of be transformed, to like do something right at the end. Like, what are you going to do in response to this preaching moment? And I think the way this short ending is set up, go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb. Terror and amazement had seized them. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. You got to do something, right? I actually totally sympathize with the people who added the middle and long ending, because I want to add the ending, right? And I think that's kind of what Mark does offer us, is an ask to add the ending, to not end in silence, to go tell people, right? And to not let the story end here. It's actually very powerful to end the story here, because it's all on all of us to not end the story here then, right? So actually it's almost a very faithful theological response that someone went and added an extra verse, or went and added an extra set of verses, because that's kind of modeling what I think actually Mark is doing in its kind of earliest form. It's asking us to have a response, to not end in silence and fear. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's such a great question. I actually think telling the stories of the faith is very powerful, and also being kind of present in you all Episcopalians do it so well, better than us Methodists most of the time. You also teach through the liturgy in such a good way. And you have such good examples of coming up through the Triduum, right? That you can actually follow the emotions and the theology through these services coming up, through Maundy Thursday, through Good Friday, through the Easter Vigil, etc. So I actually think a kind of come and see approach, come and be here, is actually a very powerful way to do that. And then actually I think reading through, when I'm teaching my Intro New Testament class for the seminarians, it's shocking how many people only read these texts in short little bursts. We only read the little pericopes. Even if you're at Bible study every week religiously, you're reading like one chapter at a time. It's really, you get a different sense when you read all of Mark through at once. You get some of those emotions. And so to help walk someone through, the whole of Mark, including the Passion narrative, and then to have a conversation with them, I think is actually, like the one we're having right now, I think is actually, it can be really powerful. But people almost never read those whole texts all at once. So that's also a good starting point. Other questions? Yeah. 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 I do stuff like this. I really do think it's like part of my vocational calling, and I also think it's like part of my honoring of my own ordination vows to like study this for a living and then to tell people about it, right? That like I'm very Protestant in this way. I think everyone should have full access, unmediated, to learning as much as they can about the Bible. I think it's got all that we need to know for our faith and life together. And so too often I find that a lot of churches, and I totally get when you're doing this, pastors are too busy, lay folks don't all go get graduate degrees in theological education. When I go to churches, they're like, which curriculum do I buy? And then I'm all set, right? How do I study the Bible? They want someone to tell them how to read the Bible and to walk them through the whole thing. And I always want people to continue to study, etc. But I want them to also learn how to think about, where can you go find stuff like this, right? Where can you look for resources? And that's why like the Candler Foundry is so great. Like there are great examples of biblical scholars who are trying to like share stuff with folks. But for me, the kind of academic study of the Bible and the life of faith are not a separate thing. It's about actually giving people access to as much as we can know about the text, and then also to say when we don't know stuff. Like I don't try to give easy answers to things. Like this is not an easy answer thing. I bet if I went some places and was like, hey everyone, I don't know how Mark ends, they might not invite me back again, right? But I actually think it's good to be honest about the things we're less sure about, or that we have some questions about, or maybe even some doubts about, and then to help people think about that theologically as well. I think that's far more honest, because I always tell my students, when they're like, oh, I can't talk about this stuff when I go into my churches, I say, they have Google, and they've read the Da Vinci Code. Like, they're going to start like looking for sources that aren't great. Wouldn't it be much better for you to help equip them to also be in a place to read and ask these kinds of questions? Other folks? Well, I hope everyone gets a chance to at least look at the monster at the end of this book. I encourage it for anyone who's got little ones in their lives. It's a great buy. And thank you all. I'm happy to stay and answer any questions for the last couple minutes, but thank you all so much.
To love and serve the Lord, but you're welcome to stick around and keep talking with one another. Thank you for being here. Come tonight at 6 o'clock, right? 6 o'clock for intergenerational agape dinner and program outside.